Hello and welcome back to my channel where I discuss Fantasy Formula 1. Today we have a slightly different but very exciting video. Earlier today, F1 Fantasy Tools posted on Twitter that they have solved the price change algorithm, at least for Formula 1 Fantasy 2024. And that is very exciting because me and pretty much all other managers have been very puzzled by how these price changes actually work. And now we know with like a 99% certainty or something like that. So that is very exciting, which means that we can now actually plan our teams to try and target price changes and price rises much better. And I'm gonna go through what their findings were and how we can use this to our advantage. But first, a massive shout out to F1 Fantasy Tools. This was discovered over on their Discord by someone named Max Alive, and then also by someone named Andy Tails, who sort of dotted the last I's, is how they quoted it. So yeah, definitely follow them on Twitter and go to their website. They are now going to be able to have price change predictions on their website before F1 Fantasy actually like updates the score in any given after any given race. So that is very exciting. I will keep using F1 Fantasy Tools, and I think you should too. So let's try and understand this together, shall we? The first thing that you need to be aware of is that all of the assets in the game, all the drivers, all the constructors, are sorted into tiers. We have the A tier, we have the B tier, and we have the C tier. And these tiers are based on the price of an asset going into a race week. So in the A tier, we have 25 million and above. In the B tier, we have from 24.9 down to 15 million. And in the C tier, we have everything below 15 million. And this goes for both drivers and constructors. So here we have all the constructors sorted into their current tiers, and there we have all of the drivers sorted into their current tiers. And I say current because if a driver were to increase or decrease in price by such an amount that they switch tiers, such as, I don't know, Fernando Alonso going below 15 million, Fernando Alonso would then be in the C tier. So these are just the current tiers, what they are looking like when I record this. But if you're watching this in the future, just look at what a driver's current price is when you're deciding whether to buy them or not, and see which tier they fall into. The second thing are these normalized points, but I'll get to that in a second, because what we can see by this table provided by F1 Fantasy Tools is that the price changes actually depends on which tier they are in and what the asset's normalized points are for the race weekend. So, for example, a C tier asset have 5 different options any given race week. They can either decrease by 0.2, decrease by 0.1, increase by 0.5, increase by 1 million, or increase by what we think is 1.5. Meanwhile, the A tier assets also only have 5 options, but their options are either decrease 0.7, decrease, we think, 0.3, not change anything in price, increase 0.1, or increase 0.2. So what are these normalized points then? Well, how it works is that you take an asset's score in any given race, or any given race week rather, and divide it by the average asset score for that race week, and then you get the normalized points. And this is split between constructors and drivers. So you take a driver's score divided by the average driver's score for that week, and then you get the normalized points. So if you see here, if a driver has a normalized point score of 0 or lower, this will be their price change depending on which category they are in. If it's between 0 and 0.5, this is the score they're in. If it's between 0.5 and 1.5, this is the category they will be in. If it's between 1.5 and 3, and so on and so forth. So let's look at an example, shall we? Bahrain this year, we had something very strange happen, or at least I thought it was very strange. We had 2 drivers that were separated by 1 point. One of them increased by 0.5 million, the other one decreased by 0.1 million. Well, let's see what happened. The total points for all the drivers points in Bahrain 2024 were 242. That is, if you take all of their combined scores at the end of the race weekend, qualifying and race included, it was 242. There are 20 drivers on the grid, which ended up making the average 12.1. The points they got, we have Ocon, we have Gasly. Ocon got 7 points in Bahrain, and Gasly got 6 points in Bahrain. This means that Ocon's normalized score was 0.579. Gasly's score, being just one lower, was 0.496. And they must be using some decimals, because if you were to round this third decimal up to 2 decimals, it would have been 0.5. So they must be using some decimals here. We don't know how many, but more than 2. This means if you look at the C category, because, you know, we can go back here, we have both the Alpine drivers here in the C tier. This meant that Ocon, with a 0.579, just ended up in this category right here, which meant that his price increase was 0.5, whereas Gasly was just below it, meaning his price change was negative 0.1. Now, that's all well and good, but how does this actually help us? Well, for one, each asset going into a race weekend only has 5 potential outcomes coming out of it in terms of their price change. For example, take these cheaper assets, these C-tier assets, both the constructors and the drivers. Well, they only have 5 options. Either they decrease by 0.2, or they decrease by 0.1, or they increase by 0.5, which is quite a lot. They increase by 1.0, or they increase by 1.5. Now, there's a question mark here, and here, and here, and that's because that hasn't happened yet this season. So we don't know for sure if this has been changed, but this is what we think the values are, right? Similarly, the B-tier assets are premium assets that I've been calling them throughout my videos. Can either decrease by 0.5, 0.2, increase by 0.1, 0.3, or by 1. And our premium assets, our A-tier assets, which is just Max Verstappen and Red Bull Racing, can only either decrease by 0.7, decrease by 0.3, not changing price at all, increase by 0.1, increase by 0.2, which means that if you are, strategists that are chasing those price rises and want to increase your team value, you're not going to do so with those A-tier assets, because the most they can increase in a week is 0.2 if they have a really, really good one. Meanwhile, these middle-tiered assets increase by one whole million if they have a good week. Another thing to note is that the cutoff for a C-tier asset is actually pretty high, 15 million. I mean, Fernando Alonso is not much more expensive than that, which means that Lance Stroll falls into the C-tier category, and Aston Martin, the constructor, also falls in the C-tier category, which means that they only have to have a get half the points of the average score, because that's how the normalized point is calculated, right? A normalized score, a normalized point of 0.5 is half of the average. If Aston Martin just get half of the average, they will increase by 0.5. Now, that's true for next week. They are currently sitting at 14.5 million, so they might be increasing up into the B tier side very, very soon. So these low-tier assets are very, very unlikely to decrease in price, but as soon as they have a decent race, like even just slightly decent race, they increase by 0.5, and they increase by way more than that if they have a good race. Whereas, the Max Verstappens are not going to increase that much more in price. They're just gonna slowly tick up with that 0.1 or 0.2 depending on how well they do. So the best way to build a budget is to look at what drivers in each of these categories, or what assets in these categories, are going to outperform other drivers in those categories and end up on a score where they can increase in price. The main outliers, I would say right now, are Lance Stroll and, if you're watching this right when I upload this, Aston Martin, who are both in this C tier rank, right? They are very, very likely to increase in price further because they only need to get a, well, quite far below average score for that week to even to increase. Another thing is that if you're running Max Verstappen, yes, you might be set to get a lot of points, but you will not build your budget. You will not build your budget to the same level as the managers or the strategists that are using mid-priced assets. I will never get used to calling them mid-price. I still think this is a premium price to pay for a driver, but for this video we're calling them the mid-priced assets. If you're using a mid-priced asset, you are more likely to build budget than if you're using Max Verstappen, and I actually think this decreases the value of Max Verstappen as an option, especially early on in the season. And it becomes sort of an option to evaluate, right? At which point do you switch to Max Verstappen? Surely he's going to be the driver with the most points for this year, but how long do you go without him, and when do you switch to him so that you can build your budget with these middle-priced assets? Again, if you also have the correct assets in this C-tier ranking, they will just keep on increasing week by week by week, such as we've seen so far with Kevin Magnussen and Lance Stroll, if he can keep it out the wall. So what does a team optimized for increasing our team value look like? Well, it will look different depending on when you're watching this, but for Japan, which is the next race weekend, it could look something like this, right? You have both Lance Stroll and Aston Martin there. Then two mid-priced assets that I think are very likely to keep performing well and thus increase in price. Ferrari also counting as a mid-priced asset. And then the two cheap assets that I can afford. I actually don't have enough to fit Kevin Magnussen in here, as he's 7.7, I believe. Correct. So I currently just put Nico in there, but if you already have a larger team budget or a larger cost cap than what I have, Kevin Magnussen should probably be in there. But something like this is what I could afford if I were to go for it and use this as my budget. So there you go. I hope you now understand how the price changes work in Fantasy Formula 1, at least for the 2024 season. Is this a good system? Well, that's debatable. I like how Max Verstappen and Red Bull Racing can't just run away in price and end up being 40-45 million at the end of a season. But I'm not sure how big a fan I am of the large difference between, you know, the 0.5 and the 0.6 normalized points in the C tier being a 0.6 value swing, such as, you know, between Ocon and Gasly in Bahrain. If I were to redo it, I would probably base it more on the individual drivers' value and maybe points per million, rather than sorting them into tiers. It feels like both Lance Stroll and Aston Martin are just going to increase until they are at 15 million, as things currently stand with the prices. And the same goes for pretty much all of the mid-priced assets. I feel like they're just going to keep increasing until they are at 25 million eventually, and then just kind of stay there. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks again to F1 Fantasy Tools and all the people that worked on this, and thank you for allowing me to use your tables and your information to make a video about it. You should definitely go and follow them on Twitter and use their site to well, make look at your teams, evaluate assets and the like. I will still do the asset tier list video that I teased in my transfer plans video for the Japanese Grand Prix, but now I will take all of this information into consideration when ranking each asset. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. See you later.